Imagine building the most accurate, reliable, precisely engineered machine in the room. You prove it through tens of thousands of rounds of brutal testing. You match your biggest rival shot for shot, passing the hardest endurance trials on the planet. And then, you lose the biggest military contract in the world. Not because your engineering failed, but because of a spreadsheet. For a century and a half, one company believed that pure engineering was enough to win. It took losing the United States Army in the 1980s to teach them a brutal lesson. A lesson they would use 3 decades later to take the exact same contract back and conquer the globe. This is the story of how a company that started by building train cars ended up arming the American military. In 1853, 3 men founded a company on the banks of the Rhine in Neuhausen am Rheinfall, Switzerland: Friedrich Pierre im Hof, Heinrich Moser, and Johann Conrad Neher. They didn't build guns. They built railway carriages. The company was called Schweizerische Wagon Fabrik, the Swiss wagon factory. Their business was the heavy iron infrastructure of a country rapidly wiring itself into the industrial age. Wagons were their product, but their true asset was engineering. The men running the wagon factory had pulled together real mechanical talent, and within a few years, they aimed that talent at a completely different problem. Switzerland needed a new service rifle. In 1860, the federal government held a competition to find one. The wagon factory submitted a design built around the work of a gunsmith named Jean-Louis Joseph Prelaz and an army officer named Edouard Bernan. Against all odds, their rifle won. By 1864, the company was awarded a massive government contract to produce 30,000 of them, adopted as the M1863. That contract changed everything. You don't produce 30,000 military rifles without becoming something else. So, they renamed themselves Schweizerische Industriegesellschaft, or the Swiss Industrial Company. In the French-speaking cantons, it was known as Société Industrielle Suisse. 3 letters that would eventually be stamped on metal on every continent: SIG. The pattern was set in that very first decade, and it wouldn't break for the next century and a half. SIG won by winning competitions. They built precision into metal, submitted it to a government trial, and let the testing decide. That was the company's entire theory of itself. Make the most accurate, most reliable mechanism in the room, and the contract follows. It would take them over 150 years to realize that the most accurate mechanism in the room doesn't always win. But SIG is only half the story. The other half of the name was older than the country it came from. J.P. Sauer and Son was founded in 1751 in Suhl, Germany, right in the gun-making heartland of Thuringia. By the time SIG even existed, Sauer had already been forging barrels for 100 years. It was one of the oldest firearms manufacturers in Germany, a maker of shotguns and hunting rifles with a reputation built up over generations. And then came a dark chapter that cannot be erased just because the company later found global success. Under Nazi rule, J.P. Sauer and Son was absorbed into the German armaments industry. The firm produced firearms for the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, and the Waffen-SS. Their handgun, the Sauer 38H, was issued to German military and security forces. Like every private manufacturer inside the Third Reich, Sauer operated within a war economy where industrial output answered directly to the regime's military objectives. This is heavily documented. It is a real part of the company's history. The modern SIG Sauer, the partnership that formed decades later, is the product of post-war industrial restructuring rather than a straight line continuing from those wartime operations. Ownership changed. The country rebuilt. But the history remains, and any serious account of this company doesn't edit it out. How do you feel about companies reconciling with their wartime histories? Let me know your perspective in the comments below. After the war, Sauer withdrew from the handgun business entirely, retreating back to sporting guns. Their pistol line went quiet for decades. It would take a Swiss partner to bring it back, because while Sauer was retreating from handguns, SIG was busy building one of the finest pistols ever made. In 1947, SIG developed the P210, based on a French service pistol design that descended from the work of John Moses Browning. The Swiss Army adopted it in 1949 as the Pistol 49. But the P210 was never a mass-market gun. It was a jewel. Its frame used internal rails machined to fit the slide so tightly that there was almost zero play in the mechanism when it fired. That insane precision produced a level of accuracy that shooters still talk about with reverence today. The P210 made SIG's name among people who truly cared about handguns. But it couldn't make SIG real money in the largest global markets. Why? Because of a political problem the company couldn't engineer its way out of. Switzerland does not let its companies freely export weapons. Swiss law was, and remains, highly restrictive about firearms leaving the country. A Swiss manufacturer that wanted to sell pistols to the world had to do it through a foreign partner, in a foreign factory, under a foreign flag. SIG could build the best pistol in Europe and still be entirely locked out of the markets that mattered. So, in the 1970s, SIG went shopping. They acquired the Swiss precision maker Hammerli. And crucially, they acquired the German firm J.P. Sauer & Son. The Swiss company would design, while the German company would manufacture and export. The restriction that had caged SIG for decades was finally solved by simply buying a way around it. The marriage produced a brand name that would become legendary, SIG Sauer. The first child of that partnership arrived in 1975, the SIG Sauer P220. Developed to meet a Swiss military and police requirement to replace the beloved but incredibly expensive P210, SIG designed it, and Sauer built and distributed it. By 1976, SIG bought Sauer outright, and the operation officially became SIG Sauer GmbH, headquartered in Germany. The P220 carried two core ideas that would define the brand. First, it used the Browning-derived lock breech system that SIG had refined. Second, it added a double-action trigger with a decocking lever, a control that let the shooter safely lower the hammer on a loaded chamber without firing. That combination became universally known as the SIG Sauer system. Then, SIG did what it always did. It saw a massive competition coming, and it engineered specifically for it. The American military was talking about replacing its aging .45 caliber M1911 with a modern 9mm sidearm. SIG took the single-stack P220 and widened the frame to accept a double-stack magazine, raising the capacity from a handful of rounds to a commanding 15. The result was the legendary P226. The P226 was built for exactly one purpose: to win the United States Army. The competition was the XM9 service pistol trials, run by the Army in 1984 on behalf of all the armed forces. The goal was to retire the M1911A1 and standardize on a single modern 9mm. 8 major manufacturers entered: Beretta, SIG Sauer, Smith & Wesson, Heckler & Koch, Walther, Steyr, FN, and Colt. The field collapsed fast. Steyr was eliminated for reliability issues. FN and Colt withdrew. Walther, H&K, and Smith & Wesson were all knocked out. When the dust settled, only 2 pistols had satisfactorily completed the brutal endurance testing: the Italian Beretta 92 and the Swiss-German SIG P226. By the measure SIG had built its entire identity on, the merit of the mechanism, the P226 was no embarrassment. It matched the Beretta perfectly through tens of thousands of rounds. In the eyes of many who watched the trials, it was the only entry that seriously threatened the Italian gun. SIG had done exactly what it had done since 1864. It brought the most precise instrument to the test. And it lost, according to the government's own accounting. Beretta won the M9 contract because of a lower total package price. But here is the absolute cruelty of the detail. The P226 actually cost less per pistol than the Beretta. SIG's gun was the cheaper gun. But when the Army totaled the entire package, the pistols, plus the magazines, plus the spare parts, Beretta's bid came in lower. SIG had won the engineering and lost the spreadsheet. If you've ever lost out on a deal, a job, or an opportunity because of a minor technicality or a spreadsheet calculation, hit the like button. It's a painful lesson. The Army wasn't buying the best handgun. The Army was buying the best deal on a handgun that worked. SIG had brought a gun to a math fight. Beretta got the contract. The 92 became the M9, adopted in 1985. The Italians took ownership of the American military's holsters for the next 3 decades, and SIG went home with a moral victory and absolutely nothing to put in the bank. But that defeat didn't kill the P226. It made it a legend through a side door. When some issued Beretta M9 slides cracked and injured shooters during hard use, the U.S. Navy SEALs went looking for an alternative. They wanted something that simply would not fail. They chose the SIG, designated the 25 Malawian kwaches. The P226 served the most demanding, elite users in the American military for over 2 decades. The gun that lost the Army on price won the undying loyalty of the men who couldn't afford a failure. What's your favorite SIG Sauer model of all time? Is it the classic P226, the modern P320, or something else entirely? Drop your favorite down in the comments. Despite the SEAL's endorsement, loyalty from Special Operations doesn't equal a 500,000 unit contract. By 2000, the original Swiss parent company exited the firearms business entirely, selling the brand to a German holding company, L&O Holding. The business they bought was dying. By 2004, the American branch was down to roughly 130 employees and was within a breath of total collapse. This is the company that, 13 years later, would beat Glock and Beretta for the U.S. Army. But in 2004, it was a near-bankrupt importer with a famous old pistol and almost no future. The man who turned it around was Ron Cohen. He made a single strategic pivot. He pushed SIG into AR-15 style rifles, the booming American market for semi-automatic long guns that SIG had barely touched. The rifles sold. Cash flowed in. The company that had been counting its last employees started hiring aggressively. By 2016, SIG Sauer Incorporated had over 1,000 employees and was a massive powerhouse. SIG had spent its first century believing the best mechanism wins. Its near-death experience taught it the rest of the equation. Engineering keeps you respected, but business strategy keeps you alive. When the Army came back around for a new pistol, SIG would remember both. The Army's new modular handgun system competition opened in 2015. They wanted a configurable pistol in full and compact sizes to replace the aging M9. It was the XM9 trials all over again, 30 years later. Glock, Smith & Wesson, FN, and Beretta all lined up. But SIG didn't bring a refined version of their old system. They brought a clean break, the P320. It was a striker-fired, polymer-framed pistol. But it had one revolutionary idea. SIG moved the entire firing mechanism into a removable stainless steel chassis called a fire control unit. That little chassis was legally the serialized firearm. The grip, slide, and barrel were just accessories. One gun could become a full-size duty pistol, a compact carry gun, or change calibers, all by swapping parts around that core chassis. They didn't just design a modular pistol. They designed a pistol named in spirit after the requirement itself. If you appreciate deep dives into military history, arms procurement, and the business strategies behind the world's biggest defense contracts, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss our next breakdown. On January 19, 2017, the Army announced the winner, SIG Sauer. The P320 was adopted as the M17 and M18. The contract was worth up to $580 million. They had beaten Glock, FN, Smith & Wesson, and Beretta. Then the details came out. It was the exact same detail that had buried SIG in 1985, turned completely upside down. On technical merits, SIG held a slight advantage over Glock. But on the head-to-head, the biggest difference wasn't the engineering. It was the price. SIG reportedly underbid Glock by more than $100 million, bidding an astonishingly low $207 per pistol. In 1985, SIG brought the cheaper gun and lost on the total package. In 2017, SIG made absolutely certain it would never lose that way again. They underbid the entire field, backed it with a technically superior gun, and finally won the math fight. Beretta, the incumbent that had defended its grip for 30 years, was out. The exact weapon that had defeated SIG in '85 was the exact weapon SIG was now replacing. A 32-year wait, settled on the same battlefield, decided by the same factor, in the opposite direction. That isn't luck. That is a company that lost once, understood precisely why, and built its entire future around never losing that way again. The victory wasn't without controversy. High-profile lawsuits emerged over alleged uncommanded discharges with civilian P320s. a fierce safety debate that is still playing out in courts today. And in 2019, SIG executives faced legal consequences in Germany over export law violations involving shipments to Colombia. The history is messy, complex, and fully intertwined with the realities of global arms manufacturing. Today, SIG Sauer isn't a near-bankrupt importer. It is one of the most important arms manufacturers on Earth. In 2022, they went back to the Army and won again, securing the next-generation squad weapon program to replace the M4 and M249. From a Swiss wagon factory on the Rhine in 1853 to a company that lost the biggest contract of the 20th century because of a spreadsheet, to an absolute juggernaut that now builds the future of the American military's arsenal. Every part of that chain was necessary. Without the painful defeat of 1985, they never learned that the best gun loses to the best deal. Without the near collapse, they never learned to fight like a business. They brought the better gun. But this time, they remembered to bring the better number, too. That is how a wagon factory armed America.